Hello my friends, and welcome to the channel for a look at a Darktide Psyker build that will have you existing at the edge of madness and reaping the dark rewards that the warp provides. I've tried the more standard safety first Assail build using Venting Shriek to keep your peril constantly low, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. It's a very solid build that makes peril management easy so you don't go fully mad in the middle of a mission at the wrong time. That being said, I wanted to try something a little different. So for this build, I'm running Scrier's Gaze, which sends you into a trance that gives you a massive critical hit chance bonus and slowly boosts your damage over time. Then I'm speccing as much as I can into critical hit chance and overall damage increases to max out the lethal potential of each magic missile in my arsenal. It requires a lot more finesse to manage peril since you're constantly generating it while in Scrier's Gaze. But the stacking damage and crit bonuses become really satisfying once you get the hang of it. And I've been successfully running this build in Auric level missions for a few days now. So if that sounds good for you, stick around and check it out. I'm going to start off by going over my talent tree for this build and how it all works. Right at the start of this section though, I'll leave up a full image of the talent tree, so if you want to just screenshot it and get back to the game, well, here you go. To start this whole thing off, I take the 4 toughness regen talents at the very top of the tree. Soul Stealer, Quietude, Warp Expenditure, and Metal. With these 4 talents, you're almost constantly regenerating toughness, either through taking out enemies with Assail, or through the constant peril generation and quelling that this build is almost always doing. Next I take Battle Meditation, which essentially gives you a 10% chance to throw a free Assail shard, because it quells the exact amount of peril that each shot generates. Then I take Perfect Timing, which lets you stack up to 15% extra crit chance while using Assail. Now obviously I'm going into the Assail Blitz ability next, and I take both Ethereal and Quick Shards as modifiers, making each missile pierce more targets and regenerate quicker so they're online more often. After this, I take the Toughness boosts and Mind in Motion so I can quell peril while moving quickly, and then I go into the Prescience Aura talent, which just gives you and all allies in Coherence 4% extra crit chance. Simple, but quite effective. After the aura, you get a really great ability for this build, and really for any Psyker build. It's called Empathic Evasion. This talent makes you count as dodging against ranged attacks specifically for 1 second after each critical hit. It doesn't say that there's a cooldown, so as far as I know, you basically get 1 second of invincibility frames against ranged attacks after each and every critical hit you make. And with this build, sometimes that's happening constantly. This build is all about crits, so once you have your crit chance maxed out, this procs all the time. And sometimes you basically just become invulnerable to range damage for decent periods of time since you crit so often. Next I take the ranged damage boost and then go into the Scrier's Gaze combat ability. This ability gives you 10% extra damage and 20% extra critical hit chance as soon as you activate it. And then it generates an additional 1% damage buff per second up to a maximum of 30%. However, you also generate peril constantly while you're in Scrier's Gaze. Slowly at first, but faster and faster the longer you stay in it. Once you hit critical peril, the ability ends, but the damage bonuses stick around for an extra 10 seconds. I also take the Precognition ability modifier, which makes every single weak spot kill add stacks to Scrier's Gaze, and adds an additional stacking finesse damage increase, which also goes up to 30%. So with all of these bonuses maxed out, you end up with 40% extra base damage, 30% additional crit and weak spot damage on top of that, and a flat 20% extra critical hit chance. The idea is to pop Scrier's Gaze basically anytime you can and build up the 60 stacks either by passively quelling peril and just spending time in it, or getting weak spot kills to quickly build the stacks without being in it for so long. Then you play a balancing game between spamming Assail and quelling peril until you hit 100%. Then you quickly quell that peril and spam as much as possible with the full damage bonus before just repeating the process over and over again. You really have to spend some time learning the rhythm, but once you get it, you'll be stacking up that full damage bonus and watching single Assail shards pierce through multiple elite enemies in no time at all. Alright, so after picking up Scrier's Gaze, next I grab the crit chance and the health boosts, and then I start going down towards Empowered Psionics as the keystone talent for this setup. Warp Rider is a pretty nice addition to this build since you're constantly generating peril, and in Scryer's Gaze, you're generally gonna be over 50%, and the damage bonus from this talent will be pretty high most of the time because of that. But the real meat and potatoes here is Empowered Psionics, which every Psyker player already probably knows is kind of the bomb if you plan on using your Blitz ability as your main damage. When using Assail, Empowered Psionics gives you a flat 7.5% chance that each kill will grant the next Assail charge minus 100% peril cost, plus 50% damage, and not consume any ammo. This is already quite strong. Each Assail charge can potentially take out multiple enemies, especially with the damage buffs, and that triggers multiple chances to get a stack of Empowered Psionics, and just giving you free shots and extra damage all the time. With the overpowering Souls modifier active, you're guaranteed to gain Empowered Psionics on any elite kill. And this build is kind of meant to target big groups of elites and just wipe them out with the big crit damage, so you'll be gaining these guaranteed charges quite often. Next, I also take Charged Up, which lets you hold 3 charges of Empowered Psionics. So if you get lucky on the percentages, or you manage to nail 2 or 3 elites with a single fully stacked charge, you can get these triple stacks of Empowered Psionics actually quite easily. To round off this section of the talent tree, I also take Psychic Leeching, which just adds even more lifesteal to this build, and it also restores toughness to your teammates while you're using your Blitz, turning you into a little healing station of death as well. Empowered Psionics is great all by itself, but importantly for this build, it makes Scryer's Gaze a lot more manageable. You generate peril while in Scryer's Gaze, but with Empowered Psionics, you are constantly getting stacks that make Assail cost no peril when you use it. This makes the balancing act around your peril generation a lot easier. And for probably the first 15 seconds of Scryer's Gaze, you almost won't even notice the extra peril since you won't be spending much to fire out your Assail shards. After this, I spend my last couple talents to get over to the Puppet Master talent, which increases your coherency radius, but more importantly, the Solidity talent. This one is a lifesaver for this build, increasing your peril quelling speed by 30%. So not only do you move faster while quelling because of Mind in Motion from earlier, but you reduce peril much more quickly, which really is helpful at letting you stay in Scryer's Gaze for longer periods of time and max out those 30 stacks of extra damage more consistently. And that basically covers it for the talents I'm using on this build. I've really enjoyed this setup as I feel it provides a pretty engaging gameplay loop of building up those stacks for extra damage and then unleashing supercharged Assail volleys on big groups of specialists and elites in the Auric missions. Watching a single shard take off the heads of multiple gunners and flamers and shotgunners never really gets old to me. And I find that the sheer damage of each shot when at full stacks made clearing some big annoying mobs in Auric missions actually pretty simple. Now when it comes to the equipment on this build, I'm going to be really upfront and say that I don't have a lot of recommendations outside of running a Void Staff and a Dueling Sword. I'm not an expert in the blessings on these weapons because, to be quite honest, I barely ever used anything except Assail on my Psyker missions, so I never really spent a lot of time min-maxing the stats on these things. The Void Strike staff is really quite useful for a few situations. First off, it's a nice fallback if you ever run out of Assail charges, and because it does warp damage, it synergizes with some of your talents from the tree. The staff is also going to be what you pull out when you run into armored enemies like Crushers and Monstrosities, since Assail specifically is kind of useless against armored enemies. For the Dueling Sword, this thing is just a nice pairing with the Empathic Evasion talent that grants you the dodging status on critical hits. You can boost the crit chance of this sword with blessings, and you have a lot of base crit chance from your talents. And this thing attacks really quickly, so you can fish for crits while fighting off hordes that surprise you out of nowhere. I'll be honest though, even in Auric missions, I found I was usually just backpedaling and spamming Assail at hordes to wave clear them really quickly. But you will be forced to swap to your sword sometimes when you get really surprised and need to push things back. For my curios, I focused on getting combat ability regeneration on all 3 of them so I can get back into Scryer's Gaze faster. And then I tried to get extra wounds just in case I go over 100 peril and go insane. Other than that, damage reduction from snipers or gunners is also pretty nice. And that more or less covers it for my Psyker build. I'm definitely keen to hear your thoughts on it. Is the risk worth the reward, or do you think being safe and going for Venting Shriek to just get rid of your peril is worth losing out on so much potential damage? Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream and Discord server down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe out there in the Hive City.